Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's HAI Group virtual event focused on cybersecurity risks facing public housing organizations. My name is Andrew Regali. I lead the marketing team here at HAI. Excited to be joined by great expert panelists on here on the call with me today. I'd like to begin just by turning it over to Troy. Tell us a little bit about why we're here today. Why are we having this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's timely, but also ongoing. Cybersecurity has been an issue that impacts all of us in our professional lives as well as our personal lives. And the unfortunate element of it is that we just haven't seen it slowing down, and we've seen it be a particular issue for public housing authorities. As the insurance company that kind of leads that space in the industry, we're continuously notified by our members of different hacks, different challenges that they've had. And we've really leaned into trying to support them in kind of the best practices. So our hope for today is that you hear from a few different perspectives, one being my own, but also the technical expertise from Brandyn, the insurance expertise from Megan, and we actually have Doug here who's going to tell us a story about something that his housing authority went through. So our hope is that you have some takeaways on things you can bring back to your agency, whether you work in IT or some other department. We're really looking to just spread the word and help housing authorities protect themselves against the continued challenge that cybersecurity presents.
Great. Thank you, Troy. That's a great transition. Let's jump right into that scenario. Doug, can you tell us about this incident that your agency experienced and that basically tell us about that first day, the initial reaction to it?
Well, it was early in the year in 2020, just prior to COVID, actually. And I had come into the office. We have an employee that comes in early in the morning. She'd come in at 7 o'clock, and I usually come in about the same time. And as I walked in the office, she said that her system was down and it was acting funny. And so I had looked to mine, and then I realized at that point that we'd been hacked because they had basically sent us a message and said that they were shutting this down. So that set us in a series of events that I was not expecting to deal with that day. And it included immediately having to contact our IT department. The IT department then went in to verify that what we thought had happened was actually happening. And they did confirm that. And then from there, you just get into a series of events that happens after that that no one's expecting to have to deal with. And that includes contacting the Michigan State Police to let them know, because cybercrime is an actual crime. We think about it as being white collar, but it's still a crime. And then the whole process of where do you go from here, and working with our IT folks to say, what are next steps. And we're going to talk about some of those steps down the road, but there's a lot of things you get involved with, I should say, as an executive director when it comes to a cyber crime that you don't even think about. You just think about the actual locking down of the system. Well, that's just about 50% of the issue of what you have to deal with. So there was a lot of learning on our part as we moved through that process in terms of what are the steps. There was a lot of learning in what we can be better at going forward. And at the end of the day, what we realized is that, we just had to tighten up our ship like everybody does to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Got a comment here to the panelists. Don't forget to report to the FBI. Also, yes, report to the FBI as well. It's a great option always. Doug, could you just follow up on that? What were the immediate kind of impacts to your operations and staff once you guys learned that what had happened or what you expected happened actually happened?
Well, immediately, I mean, as most people who are in our industry realize, is that we're very, very, very heavy tech. And so everything we do is through computers. Well, when you're shut down, that means you can't service any of your clients. That means 2,000 housing choice vouchers. That means that we can't pay landlords rent, and they don't get paid. Then, tenants get notices, and you have those kind of issues. So there's just a lot of stuff. The second part is that immediately, I was informed by my folks that there's a whole series of state law that you now have to worry about. And then what are the implications to you in terms of what are your obligations? Legally, you have obligations when you've been attacked, and then what you have to do with those things. So that all becomes a lot of what you're doing, and then just beginning the implementation of how do we then get back online? What is that process like, and what does that take? And so we began that with our tech company, putting in the idea of, how do we begin this whole process of getting back online so we could serve our customers?
Thank you, Doug. Doug's experience really is a powerful reminder that cyber incidents can truly disrupt operations quickly and without warning, and that's not a position that any housing authority really wants to be in, I expect. Megan, let's take this into the cyber insurance kind of perspective. What's important for organizations to understand when an incident like this occurs from the insurance perspective?
Yeah, so like you said, it happens quickly and without warning. So I think step one, stay calm. It's going to be a really scary time, but the first couple hours of an incident are always going to be the most important. Something else I think is really important is get your insurance provider involved early. I think the biggest misconception and something that a lot of people don't realize that the cyber policy is not just a reimbursement tool. It's going to be a response tool and it's going to really help guide you throughout the incident. So think of your cyber carrier as a guide throughout the claim. Doug mentioned needing to get a bunch of people on the phone. You need legal teams, you need investigative teams. With the cyber policy, you actually have access to all of those teams at a reduced rate. So they're going to be the ones to help get those legal firms on the phone and get the right people on the phone right away so that you can respond to an incident effectively. I think the earliest you can get your insurance provider on, the more efficient the claim is going to be handled.
Great. Thank you, Megan. That's a great point. Brandyn, let's take a look at the technical perspective here. Though you weren't involved in any way in this incident in terms of working with Lansing, you have a lot of experience in this realm. What typically is happening behind the scenes? Like, how is an attack like this infiltrated? How do they get into systems that seemingly are secure?
I think a lot of times when we think of hacking, we think of somebody behind a keyboard and a black hoodie breaking into firewalls and servers and things like that. But I think what we see more commonly happening is this happening through social engineering, whether it's an email phishing or phone call or some other form of social engineering. And it's really just exploiting the human weakness there. It's not as sophisticated as it may seem. And it's usually not as targeted as it may seem, more opportunistic. They get in, they get that initial foothold, maybe they steal some credentials, and from there they start, figuring out what else they can get to on the user's machine, on the user's network. Maybe they're using SaaS-based applications, logging into Salesforce or Microsoft or wherever else your tools might be. And then they just start going down the rabbit hole. What does this user have access to? And what we find when we do our offensive security red teaming or penetration testing is users have a lot more access to things than everybody realizes, and maybe more access than they should. They find these things, maybe data they shouldn't have access to. One thing that usually yields a lot of results is, how are they reusing credentials across these different things? So they're going to start spraying these credentials that they maybe stole or scraped the initial foothold onto other services and sites, and they're just going to start spreading out from there. With this particular one being, more ransomware, they're going to start using those credentials to see on the network what machines can I get to, and once they can get to those machines, they can start putting that malware on there and spreading that ransom throughout the network to get it shut down.
And that's a good point. And I just want to expand on that a little bit because that's what we've seen the most often is a business email compromise where someone from the housing authority is phished or one of their employees is giving up credentials. And then the bad actor is just going to sit and wait. And what they wait for is opportunity. And a lot of times that opportunity presents itself in the form of having to pay somebody. So us, as an example, as the insurance company of many of these public housing authorities, they'll wait till we send a legitimate invoice and then they'll then jump in the middle and pretend to be us. And they'll create a domain that might be HA1 group or HAI group with a 0 instead of an O. And while we try to do our part to defend against that and see when those domains get registered, and if you're insured with us, you've probably seen some notifications where we'll let you know that that's happening. But unfortunately, those things happen quick. And then all of a sudden you're thinking that you're paying your insurance premium, but you're really paying the bad actor who's now changed that. And we're going to talk a little bit about it later, but that's where defense in depth kind of comes up, and having different things in place where maybe they got your password, but hey, you have multi-factor enabled that can help protect you against that. Or maybe you went to go make a payment to a new wire instructions, but your finance team has a process in place to validate that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that more, but I'm glad you brought that up, Brandon, because the the compromise and the way that they're taking over these systems is it's not always the boom ransomware or shut down your data, or you don't always realize they're in until it's too late.
I want to add to that too. Just in our situation, one of the things that we did find out is they actually had been in support of Brandyn. They had been in our system for 3 or 4 months before they even attacked us. They were just hanging out there. And secondarily, to your point, Troy, we were attacked through a third-party software. It wasn't even our direct. It came in through someone else, then through our system and on in. So that's an additional thing you have to think about, and we now protect ourselves against.
I think that's a great transition to the next question I was going to send to Troy. Why should housing organizations view cybersecurity as a business and leadership priority and not just an IT issue?
We get it. Housing authorities have limited resources, and they want to put those resources into their residents, into their communities. They want to support, those things that are so important. But the cybersecurity has just become so prevalent. I don't really believe that the bad actors are targeting public housing authorities. I think they're targeting opportunity. I think that there's been a lot of success in that space, and with success is going to come repetition. And I would extend that out to municipalities. I think you've seen a number of towns, police departments, fire departments, schools, those types of organizations where it's so important that the funds get funneled into those missions and those visions that they have, that sometimes cybersecurity is forgotten about. But unfortunately, in the world that we live in, it simply can't. It's shutting down your operations. It's leading for you to direct resources like we talked about with invoice fraud to bad actors. It's giving up the personally identifiable information of all your residents. We were talking about it a little bit in one of our prep calls. Public housing authorities have lots of PII, or personally identifiable information, of their residents. You, in many cases, have to validate income. You have W-2s. You have all these things that have value to a bad actor. So when you add the existence of value and also the opportunity that presents itself to the bad actors, in that they've proven to be successful, I think it's a bad combination. And I think that it's important that public housing authorities realize that. And part of our reason for having Doug here was that it's very easy to say it won't happen to me, but unfortunately we've seen that it does. So I think it's just an important time. We're going to talk a little bit about things you can do. It doesn't need to be this significant technical spend. It's really about changing the culture at your organization and doing some things right. It's about the basics and creating a culture around cybersecurity.
Excellent. Megan, cyber insurance, it's still relatively new compared to some other lines of coverage in the insurance world. How have you seen it evolve in your time at M3, and where are we today in terms of the market?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And to give it some perspective, the very first policy that was ever written was in 1997. So cyber insurance is actually a very new line of coverage. It's only about 30 years old, right? So I think we've seen it change very drastically in that short amount of time. In 97, the first policy was intended to cover third-party media liability, and it's shifted. Now we're covering things like ransomware and social engineering. So it's changed and it's evolved so quickly. I think the biggest catalyst and the biggest shift we've seen is in the last 10 years or so. And I think the biggest piece of that is because of COVID, right? So I don't want to bore you with all of the details from 97 to today, but just focusing on the last 10 years or so. And in my career, I've seen it shift quite a bit. So prior to COVID, it was super easy to get a cyber insurance policy. You need to send in your website, your record count, your revenue, and you could get a policy turned around very quickly. A lot of people thought of cyber insurance as an ancillary line of coverage, meaning it wasn't necessarily a should have or need to have, but we could purchase it, but it's kind of a secondary thought. During COVID, there was a huge shift in mentality, right? A lot of us had to go work from home, and it opened up a lot of exposure for remote access. So we saw a huge spike in ransomware claims. So spike in claims, premium went up. We saw a ton of shift in mentality. Underwriters realized at the top of this mountain, if you will, that they needed to change their strategy for underwriting. So instead of just asking those 3 questions, now there's going to be a more involved application. There's going to be a little bit more nuances in terms of what needs to be in place in order to purchase a policy. So now they're asking things like, do you have multi-factor authentication or dual authentication? Do you have backups? Are you testing the backups? Do you have an incident response plan? So different types of controls need to be in place in order to get insurance. So it became a little bit more nuanced, a little bit pricier. But once the underwriters and the carriers got a better grasp on the underwriting piece of it, we were able to come down the mountain a little bit. The pricing leveled out. So in 2020, it was really, really expensive because of all of the claims. 2023 or so, 2024, it started to come down. And now we're in a more stable market where now these people, excuse me, the insurance company, or everyone has controls in place so that the insurance is able to be readily available and you can purchase it a lot easier. We're stabilizing the market a lot. So now, in the last 10 years, we've seen it go down, up, back down. We're kind of stabilizing. It's a lot more predictable. And I think it's interesting too, just to make note of it. The insurance policy is an extremely nimble line of coverage, right? Property policies, general liability, workers' comp, it's hard to make changes on those policies. The cyber policy has to stay up to date and up to speed with all these threat actors because everything moves so quickly in this world. The insurance needs to stay up to date with it. So it's a very nimble line of coverage. It changes a lot, and I think it's going to continue to change, especially moving into a more digital world.
Thank you, Megan. You mentioned some requirements that organizations might have had to do in the past when the market was a little harder on cyber insurance. What are a couple of examples of those kind of baseline requirements that organizations needed to even just get insured?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to clarify, these things are still needed. I just think it's a lot more talked about, so everybody probably has stuff like this. So multi-factor authentication is the one must-have in order to get insurance. So they want to see MFA on email access, remote access, and admin access. So different levels of additional security on those things. Already backups in place, having things in control, making sure that you're testing your backups, having an incident response plan in place. So there are different types of key elements that you need in order to get insurance that came in place during COVID, but it's still something that's needed today.
Great, thank you.
And I think some of that might sound kind of insurmountable, or I don't have any of that, but I think it's just really important to get started and have some of those conversations. There's a lot of carriers, and again, HAI doesn't offer cyber insurance directly, but we can make it available through Megan and her team with different carriers. But there's a lot of value in working with those carriers to reach insurability and having discussions around what multi-factor looks like at your organization. And I speak on this topic quite a bit. And one of the questions I get somewhat regularly is, what if my employees don't want multi-factor on their phone? Sometimes they're not comfortable getting a text message or using an authenticator app or these different ways of accomplishing that. And unfortunately, my answer is always the same. It's you kind of have to draw that hard line in the world that we're in. A lot of aging workforces exist within the public housing sector, and there's people who are just resistant to some of this change in technology, but it's so important. And, it's the first thing Megan says when she talks about insurability, and it's the first question they'll ask you, but it's also one of the least expensive things to implement. And it's really more about culture than it is technical expense, in my opinion. And there is some expense associated with that, but it's a great place to start, and it'll lead to some of the defense in-depth conversations we'll have later.
And I'd add to that, as housing authorities, we RFP all the time for a variety of services and supports that we need, and taking Megan's information and making sure that in your RFP is the things that she talked about. So when you're RFPing a technical support team, that they know that these are the minimum things that you have to provide my organization for me to select you as my next vendor.
Something else I wanted to quick jump in and add, even if you don't have things like multi-factor authentication or EDR, still apply for the insurance because you can still get a policy. It just might come with sublimits. But I always say, something is better than nothing. So even if you're not 100% in control or have the controls, that shouldn't stop you from applying for insurance. That's still something that's attainable and you can still get it. Having a small limit is better than having no limit.
And a lot of times, Megan, what we've seen is some of them might even do some limited penetration testing. Brandyn, maybe you want to talk a little bit about just kind of what that is at a high level and how they can take some of those results to improve their operations.
Yeah, so penetration testing is when you hire an offensive security team to simulate an attack on the network. And there's a couple of different ways that can be done. But usually that's done either against your external network, which is your external shell, what's public to the world. Can an attacker get into your internal network where all your data sits usually and all your users are sitting? So they'll try the offensive security team will try bang against those walls, see if they can get in. And then there's also the next step there is the internal network penetration test, which I think a lot of people look over and kind of surpass. But if an attacker is able to get in, what can they do once they're on the network? What servers can they get to? Can they get to sensitive data, databases, things like that? That's the one I see more value in. We talk to some of our clients there because it's only a matter of time before they get to the external modern security perimeter devices, do a great job of keeping the threat actors out, but it's never 100%. Someone's going to get in at some point. So making sure your internal networks kind of locked down there as well is super important. But they're going to come in, simulate that attack just like a real threat actor would, and try to show you all the ways that they can get to your data, get into your servers, and then work with you to show you those ways so you can remediate those, patch servers, change configurations before they're actually able to be exploited by a threat actor.
Thank you, Brandon. We're going to bring up a poll right now, but while that poll is up, I wanted to send one quick follow-up to you, Megan, on cyber insurance. For those on the call that don't really know much about insurance or don't deal with it, just high level, in terms of a cyber insurance policy, is it kind of a standard policy? Are there different types of policies that deal with different types of incidents, or is there a mixture of both?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's relatively standard across the board. We work with a lot of different carriers, so of course, insuring agreements might vary slightly from carrier to carrier, but largely the insurance policy is all going to cover the same thing, right? Typically, we have first-party insurance and then third-party insurance. So first party would be anything that's happening directly to your organization. So things like ransomware attacks, social engineering, that's happening right to you. Third party, on the other hand, would be things like if you were to be brought into a legal suit because you have negligently had the data exfiltrated, or you lost the data. So if you're brought into a suit, the fees, fines, and penalties are covered under that third party. Like I said, it varies slightly, but at a very, very high level, that's kind of what the cyber insurance policy is intended to cover.
Great, thank you. We're going to share the poll results here. So about 41% of respondents said 0. That's great. Hopefully that's accurate. 16% have experienced one incident, 19% 2+ incidents, 25% not sure. Brandon, did the results surprise you at all? I mean, to see some people have experienced 2+ incidents, and we're talking about minimal incidents versus like major. Like it could be, anything in that spectrum.
No, I don't think it surprised me to see 2+. I think it depends on your definition of an incident. Like you said, this could be as simple as someone clicked a phishing email and nothing really happened. We had to change a few passwords to we got hit with ransomware and got completely locked down. So I think it all depends on your internal definition of incidents. And to me, they're all incidents. There's varying degrees, and how you address those varies greatly, obviously.
Great, thank you. Right back to you, Brandon. What cyber threats are concerning you the most right now for housing organizations specifically?
And when we look at some of the recent data breaches in the news and things like that, when our offensive security team really focuses on 4 areas I think we're seeing in the news, and that's usually social engineering number 1. I think looking back last few years, email phishing always is a big one. We're seeing more and more vishing or voice phishing, where attackers are calling into service desks, trying to get the service desk to change the user's password, reset their multi-factor token, things like that. So I think we're seeing more and more voice phishing, especially with AI and some of the deep fake things that are coming around with that. Another area that we're seeing a lot of is web applications, attackers coming in through different web application attacks. So if you're hosting any kind of forms out there, collecting that sensitive PII, or you've got different ways they can come in and check the status of their application or anything like that, making sure that those web applications are properly secured, being monitored, being tested, because those are typically an easy way to find a gap and for the attacker to get in and get into back-end databases where all that data is sitting. And then I think the third one that really is a big area of risk is passwords and identity access management. That's where we see, I think right behind probably social engineering is passwords, whether it's a user is reusing passwords across different sites and they get their account gets popped on a site not related to your organization at all, but they're using it as their Microsoft login or something like that. They're using weak passwords that can be cracked or guessed in a short amount of time, but different password-based attacks. So making sure you're protecting against, proper account logouts, so they can't just come in and sit and guess for days at a time. Making sure you have, that multi-factor authentication, so that when they are guessing, if they do guess the right password, they're stopped at that second gate there. But definitely, password-based attacks are a big concern as well.
The attack that Doug's agency at Lansing experienced, he mentioned it was a third-party compromise type of attack. So, another organization that they were working with, essentially, their data leaked through that organization. And we hear about that a lot now too. Like, what are some mitigations for that? Is that something you need to set up front? And open to any of the panelists here, set up front when you are working on that contract with that vendor. Um,
Yeah,
but
I could take that one. I think that there's a couple elements of that. One, I'll speak to kind of the reuse of passwords, which Brandon brought up, and that would be if another organization has your password leaked and you're using the same one. I think some of that is cultural and just ensuring that your employees aren't using the same password. Sometimes that's hard to validate, but if you're in a Microsoft shop or your company uses kind of Microsoft, there's a lot of configurations that you can require different password strengths, et cetera. There's also a number of tools that allow you to do dark web searches for leaked passwords and run that against some of what your employees may be using. You can also do things like a search against your passwords for easy to guess. If someone has summer123 4, right? It can kind of pull those passwords out and make them not allowable in your system relatively easily. I think the other one is when you talk about kind of software and third parties and things that you're using at your organization. I separate those two because that's a different scenario, but it's important that when you're going through the contract process, you're asking those questions of what they're doing with your data. What data are they collecting of yours? How are they protecting it? There's these reports called SOC 2s, or there's different levels of them, but it's essentially an auditor's report of another company's internal controls around IT. And I think it's important that someone at your organization reviews those and asks about some of the deficiencies that may be present. It's hard once you get into that contractual stage to walk away. But if there is someone who is going to be having some of your sensitive data that isn't doing a good job of protecting it, I think it's important that you know that and you make that decision consciously. So having a process around vendor onboarding and just understanding those types of things, I think, is as important as the password piece of it. So just to separate those two, but welcome to others to jump in as well.
I think one thing I would add to that is it's not just at onboarding. This should be something you probably want to do on a fairly regular basis, at least annually, because acquisitions happen, things change. You want to be checking those things on a regular basis to make sure that they're keeping up with security.
Yeah, that's a great point.
great, thank you. Megan, what types of incidents on the insurance side are you seeing most often today in terms of like claims or things being reported?
Yeah, so my team handles a ton of different types of claims, but I think Brandon hit it on the head. The one that we see most frequently are the social engineering claims. And I think reason being the level of sophistication that those claims need to have happen is not as high as something like a ransomware. They don't need to be in your system in order to wreak havoc. They just need to trick you into doing something, release payment incorrectly or send payment wrong, click on a link, things like that. So from a frequency standpoint, we see a ton of those social engineering claims come through weekly. And I think, on the flip side of that, from a severity standpoint, the other one that we see a lot is ransomware. And unfortunately, it's something that it happens all the time. In 2025, Verizon released a report and stated that the average payout for a ransomware attack is $400,000. So this is across all industries and all, verticals. So it's not just specific to public housing, but I think it does speak volumes to the level of severity that these claims can have, especially for smaller organizations. $400,000 can be the difference of life or death for your organization. So it is a scary thing to kind of wrap your mind around.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks for enlightening us on that. we've got a poll question out there. We'll leave it up for another 20 seconds. Really quick, Doug, can you tell us a little bit about the incident that your agency experienced? Megan just mentioned costs. Would you be okay mentioning a little bit about costs and kind of how that impacted your agency?
Yeah, I mean, we did have cyber insurance that was provided through our base carrier, which is HAI, a little plug for the team. And we had a $100,000 policy at that time, and we exceeded that by the time we got done. And it doesn't seem like it when you originally get it. And we did not pay a ransom on top of that. So when I say we spent about $130,000 in total to kind of rectify the situation, that included everything that we ultimately did. So we even exceeded our policy at that time, and did not pay a ransom.
Thank you,
And Doug,
Doug.
I think one of the values of the insurance too is kind of aligning you to the different specialists in the area. I think when we were prepping for this, we talked a little bit about the forensic element, the legal element. There's just a lot of different aspects you don't necessarily think about in that lead up. It's not like property insurance where you have an event and then you're just compensated to repair your property. There's a lot of work to get to that point of repair, and a lot of those specialists, this is what they do every day. And the insurance company is a great resource to be able to align you with the people that can help you the best.
I agree, Troy. And I would say for people that have dealt with auto claims and property claims, sometimes you feel like your insurance company is your adversary when you're going through a claim like that. I will say that in the cyber market, this claim was the complete opposite. I mean, they were truly our partner in this, and as you pointed out, immediately referred us to a legal firm that then identified what all the legal ramifications were to our organization based on federal statute as well as state statute, and they're experts in it. I've got lots of lawyers in our development and in the other parts of our business, but we don't have people that deal with cyber. And so having that insurance immediately connected us with experts in that field who deal with this kind of stuff every day, which then also made us feel a lot more confident about the path that we took as we moved through the process.
Thanks, Doug. We've got the poll results up. Which cybersecurity threat concerns your organization the most? A healthy bunch, 68%, phishing or email scams. That seems aligned because a lot of those are what lead to some of the other incidents like ransomware and data breaches. So that's probably a healthy fear there. So thank you all for sharing that. And
We
we'll
probably should have
continue.
made all of the above available.
All the above. Yeah, I think we should all be scared of all of those. So very good point. Yeah. Troy, you already touched on a little bit at the beginning in terms of trends that we're observing across the industry, but is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I just hope that the takeaway is that, the housing authorities take it seriously and bring some of this back, regardless of what your position in your organization is. Our intent is we have a number of resources available through our site as well, which we'll talk a little bit about at the end. But I think the trend that we're seeing is that it's happening more than ever. Particularly kind of the invoice fraud, which starts with, getting passwords and getting in the business email compromise, but we just don't see it slowing down. The good news is there's also a lot of providers on the defense side that are looking to support organizations and can help. But weeding through that is also a little bit challenging. There's just a lot of different options and what works best for you. And, every housing authority looks different. Some have, hundreds or thousands of employees, and others is a team of 5 or 6. And depending on where you fall in that spectrum, the resources available to you might be in-house, they might be third party. So it's not a one size fits all in terms of what should a housing authority do. It's got to be a little bit personal to your individual situation, and I think that that's important. But there are ways to do this without kind of significant expense or significant IT experience in-house. So to speak to trends, I would just say it's here and it's not going anywhere. So it's time to take action.
Absolutely. I'll just reiterate, earlier in the session, I mentioned we'll be sending a follow-up email on Tuesday after the holiday. That'll include a lot of resources. One of the resources that I would urge everyone to watch is a deepfake awareness video that our Housing Training Institute team put together last year. It's a great piece, really taking into like deepfake and what's going on with that technology right now, and brings you through a scenario that could be very real. It's a fictional scenario, but it's based on real life. So with that, kind of plug, I wanted to go to Brandyn and, talk a little bit. You mentioned AI earlier. Let's dig into that a little bit. How is that changing phishing, impersonation, social engineering attacks, deepfake, AI? Like, how is that impacting everything?
I think there's really two ways it's impacting. One, the frequency and the speed at which these attacks are coming out now has greatly increased. No longer do you have to be behind a keyboard sending out an email at a time. You can create an agent, automate that, and send those out while you sleep. So we're seeing a great increase in those coming out, on a daily basis now. I think the other part too is, I 10, 15 years ago, it was easy to maybe spot a phishing email, the wrong spelling, the missed punctuation, odd fonts throughout. But with AI, it's so easy to impersonate with just maybe social media post, a blog someone wrote, maybe a video posted on YouTube or done for a news interview of some kind. Attackers are using these to create a profile of an individual and impersonate them at a very deep level. If you haven't already done on your own with your own maybe AI model, you can take the AI model, ask it to create a writing profile of yourself to help you, formulate emails and whatnot. Well, attackers are using those the same way that you're using them, but in a malicious way, and grabbing those writings, create a writing profile for this person might write, and then using that to send off those phishing emails, which look very believable and making it not only, double check like, hey, is this how this person would talk? Are they asking me something odd? And, making it even more important to check those links, check where the email is coming from. If you've got banners at the top of your email, checking those and really focusing in on that cyber awareness training and making sure users aren't just looking for those misspellings anymore, but the impersonation and deepfakes have become incredible.
And it sounds like science fiction. It isn't. We had a specialist come in and do a presentation to us where they had lifted my voice from a different recording that existed, a presentation or what have you, and they were able to recreate my exact sound, my punctuation, everything that I had, cadence, etc., and put in whatever words they wanted. And it didn't take them very long. So I know the deep fake stuff, the impersonation, some of that's not as prevalent as some of the phishing things that we're seeing now, but it's coming and it is real and it's not that difficult to do from a technical perspective anymore.
We're going to talk about kind of employee awareness and training, and we're going to ask Doug about kind of what they've done at their agency. But just really quick, Brandyn and Troy, when we talk about this technology, it's coming so far so quickly. How do these agencies keep their employees a step ahead of this?
I think empowering them to do the right thing, and a lot of times the right thing is, the lowest piece of technology, which is get on the phone and make a phone call to a number that to validate, hey, Troy, I got this voicemail from you. I just want to make sure that it's you. And even though they've gotten better, there's usually some red flag, right? The email is going to be flagged as from an outside sender. It's not from my phone number. There's usually something that can key you off. So one of the things that we do here at HAI is we do training every month for all our employees, and it's one or two different classes that we make available. And honestly, my intent isn't for them to learn something new. I hope they have that too, but it's just to create the awareness. I think if you can create a culture of employees and people that are constantly skeptical, I think you raise your chances of them seeing something that might be a little bit off and then taking the correct action depending on what that thing is, as opposed to people rushing through their day and clicking emails and giving up passwords. I think it's important to create a culture around cybersecurity more so than some of the technology fixes.
And I love the culture piece too. That's top of my list. I think along with that culture piece is I think we have to start taking away some of the punitive things when people report a phishing email that makes them less likely to report it, and therefore the attackers are staying there longer because they're afraid to report because their job may be on the line or whatever it might be. I think we need to make it an open door that they feel safe to come and report these things. They're not going to get in trouble, and then we can react then faster, but 100% a culture thing.
Yeah, we try to reward. We do phishing tests too, and try to reward those that report it. And we've seen a great increase in those that report the test. So if they're reporting the test, the hope is when one gets through our system and they're faced with a decision to make, that they're reporting that one as well.
Great. Megan, you mentioned, and Doug, you guys both talked about this a little earlier about how cyber insurance might immediately respond after an incident is identified. Megan, can you elaborate a little bit on what organizations should understand about their cyber insurance policy before an incident even happens?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is to get your insurance provider on the phone right away, right? Once you know something's happening, get them on the phone so that they can set up a scoping call and then they can get the right people in the room. So on the scoping call, they're going to uncover exactly what's going on. They're going to realize like, okay, we need to get legal on the phone, we need to get forensics on the phone, we need notification costs, things like that. So they're going to really help quarterback the situation. And I think getting them involved early is going to make the remediation go by a lot quicker. So I think Doug had mentioned it earlier, like they're your partner throughout the whole instance. It's not going to be a check at the end of the incident. They're not just going to say, like, here's your ransomware payment, goodbye. They're going to really support you throughout the entire process. So just think of them as kind of like your quarterback and leading you through the whole process.
And I would even recommend calling them even earlier than that. So there's this concept of kind of doing a tabletop exercise, which is at your organization where you would walk through kind of what if we had an incident, who's going to be involved, who's going to be in the room, who do we call? We've actually had success involving our insurance company in that process. And we tell them ahead of time, like, we haven't had an incident, but if we did, and then we have a phone call with them, and they actually appreciated us kind of getting ahead of that and getting to know them so that it's not the first call we're making to someone we've never spoken to once we have an incident. I think it helps in those first hours of chaos to at least have talked to the person that you'll be calling, know who some of the vendors that you're most likely to procure are so that you're not trying to get W-9s and different things all aligned to be able to compensate these people. So doing a full tabletop where you involve your insurance company before you even have an incident is something I would certainly recommend, and I think that they would appreciate as well.
Great. Thank you, Megan and Troy, for that insight. I think the takeaway is when you buy your insurance policy, and that's with any insurance, don't just set it and forget it. Understand, read the policy, understand how it's going to apply in certain scenarios and what coverage you have. That way, if an incident does occur, and if you practice it through the tabletop exercise, you're less anxious going into that incident, hopefully. So that's a great transition to Doug. So you've told us about the beginning, kind of the first day, some of the initial. How did tell us how did kind of the incident you guys experienced get remediated, and how did you get back online?
Well, first off, I will say that we did have an incident response plan. I did not know about it. My tech company had set one up. In full disclosure, I agree with what Troy just said and Megan that you should know what that is. I learned it on the go, on the fly, so to speak. But luckily, they had one in place. We had redundant services, which was also great. We had a sister agency in the state of Michigan that had been hacked earlier in the prior year, later in the prior year, and they were offline for 30 days. And so it can be significant. And I go back to what I said earlier. If you have housing choice vouchers, you have, it's not just your own employees that it impacts. It impacts your community because you are putting out, money every month to these landlords that are supporting your tenants and then other, subcontractors that are working to turn units and all that kind of stuff. All of that just comes to a halt. Fortunately, my IT, because we had a good plan, I was back online on Wednesday. We were hacked Monday morning. Well, it actually happened over the weekend. We found out about it Monday morning when my employee came in. But I was back up on Wednesday, and then they systematically brought up our highest level employees, and we kind of worked through the incident plan of who was going to come up next and how they would go through that. And to Megan's point, it was right in front of COVID, and one of the things that we did put in was, well, what happens, for these people that are working remote? Because we had several people that were working remote. So we put a bunch of stuff in place because of our incident that then about 4 weeks later when COVID hit, we were one of the few organizations that wasn't worried about it because we had just been hacked and just put in all the things that were necessary for people to we just say, hey, take your computer and go, you're good. Otherwise, I know a lot of people scrambled during that time, and that's why the high incident rate that I think Megan talked about. So anyways, we got back up and running. A lot of it was related to the, working with our partner. Again, as a part of the incident report, the incident response was to notify our carrier. And so I didn't even know that we had back then cybersecurity. And they said, well, do you? So I called my agent. He goes, yes, you do. And so then we started that whole process. So, I mean, we were really kind of, out there at the time, but fortunately now have a much higher awareness level. And so then we did get through it all. We got back up. Everybody was back up and running in about 7 days. And then within 30 days, we had then put in place the new remediation and things that were necessary to protect us at that time. And now is everything else. It's an ongoing process. So I will say one interesting story at the end is I did talk a little bit about how the legal folks talked to us about it, and we were fortunate that by the time they did, our tech people did their evaluation, there was a pretty good idea that we were in the high 90s, that nothing left the system, which is a big trigger to a whole nother set of cost in terms of notifying your clients and then maybe providing them with insurance like a LifeLock and those kind of things. But there was still a couple of hours that they couldn't account for, literally hours, 2 or 3 hours that our tech people said that we're pretty sure, but we're not clear during this time frame. And so they said the last piece of this thing that we can do that I kind of laugh about today is that we can go out into the dark web and see if we can actually buy your information. And that would be the last piece of protection for you, both from a legal standpoint, but also from a, kind of a comfort of mind. And so it was an additional cost. It was a couple $1,000s more to do that. But at the end, our legal team actually hired someone to go out onto the dark web and try to buy our information, and they were unsuccessful, which then took us to a higher level of confidence, both in the fact that the data didn't leave, but also in terms of our legal responsibilities that nothing left the system. And so we felt confident that we didn't need to send out notices to our clients, to thousands and thousands of clients. And that's just not your customers. It's people that have applied for housing with you. You have to notify them as well. So it's, you think about, well, we only have 50 residents. Well, how many people have applied in the last 7 years? That's the number, plus everybody else that you deal with. So the number is a much bigger number than you think it is until you get into this. So the protection's real, but we got back up and running in a pretty quick, because we had an incident response team, to our incident. So.
And Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but your team, and you had a third-party IT team working with your organization. Some larger organizations have their own IT team, so there could be differences there. But either way, they had set up a plan where you guys had a backup, a segregated backup that you were able to bring up your system in that backup and not have to pay a ransom, correct?
Correct. That's exactly what happened. And that was, again, that was instituted into our organization before I got there by our IT vendor. So we were fortunate that we had a really good IT vendor. But I think Megan laid out earlier, and as I said earlier, when you're doing RFPs, these are the basic things you need to do. And working with your cybersecurity, now you have a partner that you can talk to them and say, hey, look, what is my minimum requirements for an IT consultant? Whether it's the one-man show, or it's a larger IT company, these are the minimums that you have to provide my organization.
Andrew, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Brandyn, can you talk about backups a little bit, and for the organizations and folks on this call who are in this type of thing every day, what those are and kind of how they could be used to bring yourself back online in a situation like this?
Yeah, so hopefully at some point here you've identified the data that's important to your organization, and you then are backing it up. When we're talking about backups, we are taking that data hopefully from whatever system it's on, whatever network is on, to a separate environment that's air gapped or completely separate from your network. That way, if an attacker gets in, launches ransomware across your network, the backups are somewhere completely safe and not anywhere touching it, so those can't be destroyed. We call those immutable backups, where they're separate, they can't be changed. And then hopefully you've got a recovery process in place so you know what data to bring back online. And as you're talking through backups, having we call them recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives. These are going to tell you how much backups do you need to keep? Are you okay with losing a day's worth of data, a week, a month, a year? How often do you need to do those backups? And then recovery time objective is how quickly do you need to get those online? Can you be down for an hour, a day, a week? So talking through not only where are you keeping these and what data you're backing up, but how much are you keeping and how quickly can you restore those is also important as we talk about restoration efforts.
And definitely testing that process. There's been a couple of events where organizations had backups in place, but the password was on the network that they were just locked out of. So understanding what would be available, what wouldn't be available in these potential incidents, and being able to test that you can restore those backups in that same situation, I think is important. And agree with everything else that he said.
So Doug's kind of laid out that scenario. Megan, I imagine that even after kind of the initial phase gets remediated, that the vendors that are working through the insurance with the organization that's had that incident, there's a continued work with them, continued monitoring. How does that work usually?
Yeah, good question. There definitely is continued monitoring, and they will help with the remediation piece and make sure that you're back up and running and whole again. But something else that I kind of wanted to touch on that I think is oftentimes overlooked. With the policy, you have access to a lot of risk management tools that are available to you at no additional cost. So you can use these things prior to an incident even happening. I think we talked a lot about the employee awareness training. That's something a lot of carriers are offering to you at no cost. So you can use that and, bolster your cybersecurity posture so that potentially we can avoid any sort of incidents happening down the road. So even if something happens, you can continue to use those risk management resources. But if nothing happens, still continue to use the resources. Troy had mentioned tabletop exercises being a huge, thing that he would encourage people to do. I completely support that. That's something that a lot of carriers actually offer for free, or they offer support in setting you up in the right direction, or like ask you the correct questions. So those are things that you should take advantage of so that if something happens, you know what to do.
We discussed a little bit about employee awareness training and reducing risk earlier. Troy mentioned, is any of that sometimes offered through kind of the risk management resources that are involved through these policies often?
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to how the coverage changes slightly from carrier to carrier, the risk management resources will change a little bit too. But a lot of times, security awareness training, employee awareness training is something that's a standard for all policies.
Doug, what advice would you give organizations that want to improve preparedness before an incident occurs from like the housing authority perspective, knowing kind of the limitations that you have budget-wise, et cetera? Like what's like the biggest step that you would, or advice that you would offer on preparedness?
Well, I think the first thing you have to admit is that you don't know what you don't know. We're not experts in tech. That's not what we do. Executive directors know how to house people. We know how to administer the HUD rules and regulations that are a part of our day-to-day work. But if you get locked down and you lose your data, as was mentioned earlier, I mean, there's no better victim than a housing authority, because we have IDs, we have social security numbers, we have income, we have all of that personal data that a cyber crook would want, which makes us a higher target group, much higher than your other people that are out there. So you first have to recognize that, and then once you recognize that, I think you really need to make sure that you enlist experts. And as I said before, your RFP and stuff all the time, some of it mandatory by HUD. Don't overlook this part of it, and in understanding that you need to do that. And no matter how small your tech is, whether, as Troy mentioned earlier, in-house person, third-party vendor, whatever it is, there are certain minimum criteria that you need to have. And then secondarily after that is make sure that you follow up with employee training and the things that go with that we've also discussed. We do weekly training, just a little video that comes out that they have to go through, and they get marked down whether they went through the training or not. We have a monthly version of the same thing. And then in addition to that, we have the phishing. And I get the notification if somebody clicked on a phishing email, and I usually send them a little email kind of, razzing them a little bit because we're a small group. And then we talk about it at our quarterly meetings as well, about the number of phishing, people that got caught phishing over the last month. So just to raise the awareness that it is out there. And as I think somebody mentioned earlier, you just build a culture that we need to be aware of this. And it's getting worse. I mean, I had an email, as Troy talked about 2 months ago, from my secretary to pay a bill. She sits right outside my door, and I told her that, no, this is fake. It's not a group that we work with. But it came from her on our email system. And so I said, no, I didn't do it. And like 15 minutes later, I get an email like, well, what's the status of this? And I yelled out my door. I go, why did you send me that email again? And she goes, I didn't. So I literally had gotten a second email from her about an hour after we'd already discussed that this was phishing to say, and so we then obviously we had already identified it with our tech company, but it's that real that, I mean, it's, it was just, those things are happening all the time now. So just awareness, awareness, awareness.
Thank you, Doug. We're going to bring up one final poll here, so appreciate your engagement with that. And while we have that poll up, we're going to do some rapid fire questions here just to close things out. And we want to leave you all with some action items out of this. We want you to be able to take action and not just come away with theory. So I'm going to ask everyone to go around. We'll start with Megan. One action every attendee of this webinar should take in the next 30 days.
Selfishly from an insurance standpoint, if you don't have insurance, apply for it. But if you do have insurance, review your policy and recognize who is in your corner so that when an incident happens, you're not meeting these people for the very first time.
Great. Brandyn?
Multi-factor authentication, that's going to stop the attackers 9 times out of 10 in their tracks. And I think a lot of people ask, do we have multi-factor on? And they think because they have it on their email, they do. I think the right question to ask rather is, where don't we have multi-factor? There's so many legacy systems out there that may be missing it, and those are just entry points into your data.
Troy, go ahead.
I always like the old, it's easy to say one day, but it's harder to make it day one. Make it day one, right? Regardless of your position at your organization, if cybersecurity hasn't been something that's top of line, bring it to leadership. We've made a number of resources available. There's a lot of things out there to help you get started. I agree with what Megan and Brandon and Doug have shared as well. Multi-factor is the biggest bang for your buck, and anyone can create a culture around cybersecurity, particularly if you work at a housing authority that's a small team. Doug mentioned he works closely with them, and by making it somewhat humorous or something that you talk about often, you create that culture. You at least start to get people thinking that way. The human firewall is something that comes up all the time in cybersecurity. And I think it's the most important thing. And what that really means is that having people be your biggest protection is sometimes the easiest thing that you can do and the most impactful, but also the least expensive. So start with the culture. MFA is hugely important, as is insurance, but don't wait for one day. Make it day one.
Thank you. Doug, you've shared a few things, but what's like the one top thing that you would share with your fellow PHA colleagues? Yeah.
I'm going to echo exactly what Troy and Megan said. And one is, make it day one. Make sure you do it. We spend a lot of time talking about property casualty and liability insurances on our properties and making sure we have the right amount and complaining about the price sometimes that our carrier's charging and everything else. But if you don't know what you don't, that if you don't have cybersecurity, I'm going to be the first one to tell you that we got out of it really, really, really cheap compared to what it could have happened to the organization. And so it's a big deal. So make sure you have the coverage first. Second is make sure that you have the minimum levels of coverage that Megan's identified. And the third one is do what Troy said, make it day one. If you don't have these right now, make sure that you go out and begin to seek quotes to get cybersecurity. Running around without cybersecurity today in our world is one of the most fiscally irresponsible thing you can do as an executive director.
And I'm going to end this with one more question for the group. And while I do that, we're going to have the results here. And the question is, what gives you optimism about improving cyber resilience? We talk about a lot here today, and a lot of it can be a bit scary. But let's take the optimism angle. I'm optimistic that 42% of respondents on the poll said they feel very prepared. That makes me optimistic. Troy, what are you thinking?
Like I said earlier, I've been speaking about this for a number of years, and I've if I go back 5, 6, 7 years, there wasn't a lot of engagement. I think I've seen that really improve. I think we've had a number of housing authorities really take us up on some of the resources and insurance and things that are available. So we've started to see them take it seriously and realize that it can and does happen to them. So we certainly appreciate that. And we're just looking to continue to spread the word. Obviously, the bad actors aren't slowing down, but there's a number of resources available to housing authorities and other industries as well. And that keeps growing too. So I think that optimistic, but cautiously so.
Brandyn, what's making you optimistic in today's climate?
I think the foundational security controls work, making sure you have strong passwords, making sure you're patching things, making sure you're reviewing vendors. Those things work no matter the new threats that come out, just adapting those to the new threats, new technologies, but continue to build off the strong foundation that you've established.
Megan?
I think what's giving me optimism is just the conversation around cybersecurity, right? Like before, 10 years ago, with COVID, it was something that we might want to have, kind of talk about. But then now it's something that's top of mind. It's on all of the CFO, CEO's mind. It's something that everyone wants to be aware of. And I think the awareness is really giving me optimism that we are moving in the right direction.
Right. Doug, we'll give you the last word. What's making you optimistic?
Well, I would say that the one is what Megan said, that the conversation has been raised. I see it more and more at conferences I go to, that cybersecurity is now an actual topic where it wasn't 10 years ago at all. And I think the second thing is another plug for HAI is that they have recognized the significance of this as well, that we have a security grant that you can get as a policyholder of HAI. And it's not only just cameras now and other security prevention, but there's an actual cybersecurity grant that you can get as well that is out there for, housing authorities that don't have the funds, that you may be able to seek them from your carrier. I'm promoting the HA one, but there are actual funds being provided out there to help smaller PHAs to try to get so that they have the same kind of protections that some of the larger ones do.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Doug. Thank you for bringing that up. Reminder, we will be sending out details, all things cybersecurity related with the recording here, resources that we can make available through M3, HAI Group, Centric, different sources next Tuesday. So look for that in your inbox. But I just wanted to thank everyone on our panel and for everyone joining us today. It's been a great conversation. I know we're going into a holiday weekend, so I appreciate everyone spending their Friday with us. And just know that the FBI says that most cyber attacks occur during holiday weekends. So not to leave you scared, but make sure your IT team is keeping an eye on things this weekend. And with that, we'll let you all go. Have a great holiday weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.